Web fonts are linked to our web pages from external sources and activated when needed. Now that web fonts are supported in most browsers, and more sophisticated typographic features are being implemented in the latest versions of HTML and CSS, our options have vastly improved. The web has made a lot of progress with web fonts and CSS, with advancements in cross-browser support and access to open-type features. And now that they're supported by all the major browsers, a multitude of web fonts are available for use at the click of a button. So with all the different ones available, what makes a good web font? We'll need to consider many of the same factors we discussed in the first video on choosing a typeface, like how it pairs up with other fonts and if it matches the emotion or mood we want to convey. But again, legibility is most important, followed by consistency across platforms and browsers. We want to make sure that the fonts display on every browser or device, so we'll need them to come in all the necessary font formats, which we'll go over shortly. We also shouldn't just settle for one we think might work. We'll need to check the character sets and the features before using it and make sure it was designed for web use, because if it wasn't, we may lose a lot of the details in the font. We'll also need to consider loading time, because web fonts do add to it, and it can affect performance. And finally, we'll need to consider the price. In order to have all the glyphs or characters we need in a web font, we'll oftentimes have to purchase the font or pay a subscription to a web font service that will host and serve the font to our site. When we purchase a font and host it on our server, we're purchasing a license to use the font, as some are protected by trademarks or copyrights. Each font has a user and license agreement, or EULA, which describes the rights granted to us by the font vendor. Each font's EULA will be different, so we need to carefully review the terms to understand what we can and cannot do with the licensed font. But with most of the free fonts, we're able to use them freely for all of our personal and commercial work. Once a web font is chosen, we'll need to test it everywhere, at different screen resolutions and different sizes, because using these fonts without proper testing can result in poor screen readability and rendering. We can use a font service to take care of the font loading process for us, which relieves us from all the browser support concerns because they serve the latest version of every format for all browsers. They also handle updates and they're optimized for screen use. They usually provide a wide variety of quality fonts, and they handle all the licensing and hosting for us, so we don't have to worry about it. Some of the popular subscription services for web fonts are typekit.com, fontdeck.com, also fonts.com. Many of the font services have a trial period, or they let us try the web fonts before buying them. So it's important to take that opportunity to test them. There are also many sites and services out there that offer free web fonts for downloading. Some even serve them directly to our site. Fontsquirrel.com is a popular one. It offers a lot of high-quality fonts, and it even has a font face generator for converting fonts into all the necessary formats for web use. Another one is the League of Movable Type. Now, they're supporters of the open source type movement, so they distribute many well-made open-sourced fonts. One of the most popular ones these days is the Google Web Fonts because of the Google Font API, which lets us use quality free open-source fonts hosted and served by Google. So back in our project, what we're going to do is add a few web fonts to our layout here. We'll go with the Droid Serif typeface we'll grab from FontSquirrel and embed it using the font face rule in our style sheet. For the body text, we'll use Open Sans from the Google Font API. So let's start with the body text. So we'll select the Open Sans font here, and if we click Pop Out, it shows us all the characters and glyphs. It also suggests fonts that will pair well with Open Sans. Now to use it, we can go ahead and just select Quick Use and then choose the styles we want. Now here, I'll only be using it for the body text, so I'll select Normal and Normal Italic. And this also tells us the load time of the font. It's in the green area, so we're good there. We can also choose extended characters if we need to, but we're not going to here. And it also gives us 3 different methods of importing the font. So we have the standard method with an HTML link tag. We could also include it with the import rule in our style sheet and with JavaScript. But we'll go ahead and use the standard method. So I'll just copy this. Then in our HTML file, I'll add this link tag in the head section of the page. Then in our style sheet, we'll call that font with the font family property. And then we'll just specify the name of the font we included, which is Open Sans, followed by the fallback font of sans serif. Now we'll go and grab our font for the heading. So at fontsquirrel.com, I will download the font face kit, and then I will select all font formats and click download. After downloading them, I'm just going to select the bold font because I'm only using it for headings. And these will be hosted by us, so I will add them in a directory named fonts. Back in our style sheet, we'll link to all the font formats in order to deliver them to browsers in a standards compliant way. So we'll need to create an @fontface rule to do that. The @fontface selector has been around for quite a while. It was actually part of CSS 2, then was dropped in CSS 2.1, but came back later as part of the CSS Font Level 3 module. FontFace allows us to link to each font format, which are then activated when needed by a specific browser or platform. So first, we'll need to name our font with the font family property. And then I'll go ahead and name it Droid Serif Bold. We can name it anything really because it's for internal use in this style sheet only. Next, we'll need to specify the locations of the font files. So I'll just quickly paste them in here. The reason we should specify alternate versions is for broader browser support. So let's go over the most common font formats we used here. First, the embedded open type, or EOT format, is a proprietary format for IE. And the format below is a bit of a trick that makes the font work in IE 6 through 8. Below that, we have the WOF, or Web Open Font Format, which is a newer web font format developed by Mozilla, and it's supported by most browsers, including IE9. An advantage of the WOF format is that it loads super fast because the data in the font is compressed, so sites using it will actually use less bandwidth. The TrueType format, or TTF, is being used here for Safari, Android, and iOS display. And below that, we have the SVG format. Some of the benefits of SVG is that it's open source. So the font is completely opened, and if the font you're using is missing glyphs, you can add the glyph you need in the SVG. But here, we're using it for legacy versions of iOS. We still need to consider performance, as using too many font face rules can affect our load time. So we need to keep these to a minimum and only embed the fonts we need. I'd say no more than 4 or 5. Now, the formats are fine because the browser will only use the ones it supports, but it's these entire font face rules here that we need to be careful with. So next, to actually use the font, we'll just need to call the font in a CSS rule like we would with any other font. So in our title rule here, I'll use the font family property, Then I will call the Droid Serif Bold font, and I will follow it with the fallback options. Now, when listing these fallback options in a font stack, first we'll list the ideal font, followed by an alternative, then the common and generic versions of the font. Listing fallbacks by creating a font stack is important because if a character or glyph is missing in our chosen web font, the browser will fall back in our font stack to the next font that has the glyph. This can sometimes lead to undesirable results though, so be careful with putting completely different fonts in the stack. Many of the free fonts that allow @font face embedding suffer from missing glyphs, so in these cases, the subsetted fallback font might come in handy. We can also take advantage of this feature by subsetting only those glyphs we need for things like ampersands or old-style figures and numbers, which can then create smaller font files and speed up site performance. So we'll save our style sheet here. So let's review it in the browser. When we refresh, there we can see our Droid Serif Bold font we downloaded from Font Squirrel, and there is our Open Sans font being served from the Google Web Fonts. Now I'm noticing here that the letter spacing in our heading 2 seems a little too loose, so we can easily adjust this with the letter spacing property. In our heading 2 rule, I'll just add the property letter spacing, and let's take the spacing down 2 pixels. So our value will be -2. We'll refresh that, and now you can see that the kerning is a little tighter, so it looks much better. Next, let's embed an icon font in our page. Icon fonts are icons or pictograms that would normally be implemented as an image or vector file, but are converted into a font instead. Icon fonts speed up our design process and can significantly improve site performance. In fact, they can load as much as 14% faster than images and can be up to 90% smaller than SVG files, so they are superior to using images in SVG for icons. And they allow us even more resolution independence because just like a web font, they scale to any size without losing quality, and they'll always look crisp at any resolution. Some popular sites that offer icon fonts are symbolset.com. It's also pictos.cc, which works just like the other font services that serve the fonts directly to your website. And another one is icomoon.io. So the ones we'll use will be from icomoon.io. I want to add the CSS3 icon to the top of our page, right above the heading here, even though preprocessors are not really CSS3, but we'll just use it for this example. And I also want to grab the HTML5 icon. So then I'll go ahead and click Generate Font, and it then gives us the Unicode characters to use in our code to generate the icons. I've downloaded the icon font in all the necessary formats and placed them in a folder called Icons. Now we'll need to link them just like we did earlier with our web fonts. So back in our style sheet, I'll once again start with the font face rule. Then I will add all of the icon font formats. So here again, we have the EOT, WAF, TrueType, and SVG formats. To display these, we'll use a pseudo element to generate the content before our containing wrap element. So right below our wrap rule, I'll create a before pseudo element. Then I'll go ahead and add the content property. So the content property will generate a Unicode character, which then renders as our icon. Next, I'll just need to call the font family, which is icomoon. So we'll review this in the browser. And there we can see our icon font at the top of the page. Now we can style it in the same way we would with text. So back in our style sheet, I'll add a few more properties just to increase the font size, give it a background color, and make the color white. And we'll see what that looks like. So it's starting to look a little better. So next, we'll add a little padding and positioning properties to get it just right. We'll review it once again, and there it is, right above our main heading. And if we need to change it to the HTML5 icon, all we have to do is change the Unicode characters and the content value here. And we refresh that, and there's our new HTML5 icon. That's looking good. But there is one more thing we can do to improve the clarity of this icon font. If we look closely, we can see some aliasing going on in the icon, which results in jagged edges in some areas. We can use the CSS font smoothing feature to fix this for us. So back in our wrap pseudo element rule here, I'll just add the WebKit font smoothing property with the value anti-aliased. When we refresh that, we can see that now our icon renders a little smoother. Web fonts usually contain a large set of OpenType features, which until recently were only accessible in OpenType savvy applications like Photoshop, Illustrator, or InDesign. Well, the future of web typography is bright with the current browser support of OpenType features, which we can access using the Font Feature Settings CSS property. This gives us the power to enable or disable certain font features whenever we need to. And with the release of IE 10, all major browsers except Opera support this feature. But that should change soon with Opera now transitioning over to WebKit. So let's add a ligature to our main heading here. But first, we'll need to change the text so we can see how this works. In our HTML file, we'll go ahead and change the main heading from CSS preprocessors to something like finely crafted code so we can see how the ligatures will affect this. So ligatures are used to improve the appearance of text for letters that are too close together, like the F and the I. They create a smoother transition or connection between letters by connecting certain characters when they're next to each other. So in our heading, it will fix the distraction collision between the letter F and I by combining the dot over the I with the terminal of the letter F. So let's see how this works. So I'll go over to Typekit, and I will need to embed a font that supports ligatures. In this case, I'm going to use FF Tiza Web Pro. Now, this is a subscription service that I've already subscribed to, and they give me a script that I just need to embed in my page to generate the font. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So now in our style sheet, I'll just need to add this new font in our title rule. So we'll review it in the browser, and there we see the Tiza Web Pro font being served from Typekit. To use the font feature settings, we'll need to first make sure the font we use includes all the glyphs we need, which this one does. So in our style sheet, we'll just need to add the following line of CSS to turn on these ligatures. So this feature enables common and discretionary ligatures in words. Liga are common ligatures used to combine letters in like F, I, FL. Usually, many of the quality web fonts include these ligatures as standards. Dlig are discretionary ligatures, which are similar to the common ligatures, but they're more for non-standard ligatures and word ligatures. Discretionary ligatures are useful for script typefaces when you want to make a lot of custom combinations. So we'll refresh this, and there we see that the settings joined the letters F and I into a single glyph. And it will do the same for the letters FF, for example, and FL. So I'll just add them here. And there we see how it joined the crossbars and the Fs, and it also joined the letters F and L into a single glyph.